Hello, and welcome to the fourth of the Whipline series on the extraction economy, or Rentier capitalism. In the last one, I used Tony Blair's attempt to change Labour policy to explain what those terms mean and how they apply to us, in theory. In this one, I bring the discussion full circle by relating it back to Alan Milburn's report on why so many young people are not in education, employment, or training. Young people are not unable to get into work because they are lazy, according to Milburn's landmark report. Instead, reading between the lines, the social contract has been broken, meaning it is now almost impossible to become better off through hard work, simply because the jobs are not there. Milburn's report on NEETs, young people who are not in employment, education or training, states that entry-level jobs have disappeared, mostly because many of those who would have provided them in the past now prefer to extract money in rent for the assets they own. Meanwhile, because housing and living costs are rising, young people cannot achieve independence and stability of their own. Repeated rejection by the few employers who are left erodes their confidence and eats into their mental health. A symptom of this is isolation in bedrooms and what we call doom scrolling. They are forced to turn to the benefit system to survive, either claiming unemployment or disability benefits, depending on their physical and/or mental health. As a result, benefit spending rises and politicians focus on this rather than the structural problems that have thrown young people into the benefit system. So they do nothing to address those problems and the cycle deepens. Or they restrict benefit eligibility and the cycle deepens. Milburn himself said, before the report was published, that the schools, health and skills systems all need reform in order to make young people able to meet the challenges they are now being forced to face through no fault of their own. As I described it in a previous piece, when some people say what's needed are stronger obligations to seek work, benefit conditionality and employer incentives, the response should be that those things only work if other elements are in place. We need a decent industrial strategy, public investment, stronger protections for workers, better wages, better public services, and work to rebuild local economies before those other suggestions can ever work properly. Let's support these assertions with some of Milburn's own words, taken from the BBC's report on it. Milburn said rejections for young job seekers, after submitting dozens, sometimes hundreds of applications, had become the norm and challenged a characterization that young people were not trying or were work-shy snowflakes soft. The problem is that for too many young people, opportunities are not growing, they're shrinking, Milburn said. The old contract in society was always you put in effort and got a reward. Each generation would do better than the last. This contract has been broken for this generation. Entry-level jobs have sharply declined, with the number of mid and lower skilled jobs in the economy falling by around 1.6 million over the past 20 years. Vacancies in hospitality have halved in the last 4 years alone, according to ONS data. The cumulative cost of almost 1 million neat young people to the UK economy has been estimated to be £125 billion per year, according to the review. That includes £38 billion a year in lost economic potential and £63 billion a year lost due to economic scarring, as they are less likely to work in the future. It also includes losses in tax revenue, increased health and benefits spending. The report said there is not one factor causing the crisis, with the COVID pandemic, smartphones, and the current jobs market all having an impact. The evidence does not support a single explanation, he said, adding that there was no evidence of a link between migration and joblessness among young people. It supports something harder to accept, that the institutions we built to support young people into adulthood are no longer fit for that purpose, and that the country has known this for some time. In a speech, he added that changes in mental health had also reduced the supply chain of young labour, with a sharp increase in the number of NEETs reporting anxiety and ADHD as a key factor as to why they are not in work or training. Systemic problems, he claimed, were also leading to a bedroom generation who doom-scrolled and did not leave their rooms. High street retailers and hospitality businesses, such as restaurants, cafes and pubs, often offer the first experience of work for many young people. The effort and reward point is especially important. For decades, mainstream political rhetoric promised that if you study hard, behave responsibly, and get qualifications, you will get a good job and steadily improve your life. But many younger people who did study and got the qualifications are watching entry-level jobs disappear out of their reach with the automation of junior roles and employers demanding experience for starter positions. Any work they do manage to get is insecure with stagnant wages. We are seeing, and this was made explicit only yesterday, that wealth and prosperity no longer comes from gainful employment because there is no more gainful employment to be had for the vast majority of young people. Wealth increasingly comes not from productive contribution or labour, but from ownership. Landlords extracting rent, monopolies extracting fees, finance extracting interest, utilities extracting captive payments, and asset owners benefiting from rising values disconnected from wages. In that environment, work is simply a way of addressing recurring, possibly increasing debt in a system that is now designed to funnel wealth upward. And the asset owners know that in the UK, people don't need a job to service those debts. If they're on benefits, the government does it for them. That's why we've seen a loss of 1.6 million mid and lower skilled jobs over 20 years, an enormous number of what were historically the on-ramp jobs that allowed people to gain confidence, routine, references and experience. The number of losses in hospitality alone hammer the point home. If pubs, cafes and restaurants disappear, so do huge numbers of first job opportunities. Milburn's point about migration is welcome because immigration is often presented as the default explanation for labour market problems. Explicitly rejecting that narrative removes one of the most common simplifications. It won't stop anti-immigration rhetoric, but it does provide an authoritative counter-argument grounded in evidence rather than sentiment. The issue of mental illness is more complicated. Anxiety, depression and social isolation did worsen after COVID, especially among younger people. But there is a risk in framing this as a cultural or behavioural problem because that can imply personal weakness rather than recognising the material pressures involved. Young people live in a constantly insecure atmosphere. The labour market is hyper-competitive because there are so few jobs. Housing is unaffordable. Social connections have atomised. And climate anxiety means they can't even be sure the country they live in will be inhabitable in the future. In other words, worsening mental health may itself be at least partly a consequence of the same structural economic conditions Milburn describes elsewhere. Given what seem to be the facts of the situation, we can see that the proposals to tackle it are pitifully inadequate. Work and Pensions Secretary Pat McFadden said, "We are already taking action by bringing forward the biggest youth employment reforms in a generation to create 500,000 opportunities for young people, including a youth jobs grant for businesses starting next month, more apprenticeships, and subsidized employment to help young people get a foot on the ladder." What good will any of that do if potential employers would rather not bother taking people on when they can just charge for assets that they own and rent out instead? Some employers have argued it has become more difficult to hire young people due to higher minimum wages and increased taxes, such as employer national insurance contributions. But the article states that the Institute for Fiscal Studies found there is no clear evidence that higher minimum wages have been a major driver of young people becoming NEETs. The IFS also pointed out in its latest research that most young adults aged 18 to 20 are largely exempt from employer national insurance. These are distractions from what's really happening here. The report argues against simplistic welfare cuts, and that is to be welcomed. If the problem is genuinely collapsing entry-level employment against the background of a broken economic contract, failures of public institutions to keep up with what is happening, and weakened public services, then reducing benefits alone cannot plausibly solve it. At best, it would only change the level of hardship experienced while people remain excluded from stable work. The real challenge for government is that the kinds of reforms implied by the report are large, expensive, and long-term. Rebuilding local economies, restoring public services, expanding training, creating secure jobs, investing in mental health support, and reshaping housing and labour markets. Those are much harder than simply tightening benefit rules.